Hello and welcome to today's talk, which part of the Innovation Week this week. Firstly, before I start, I want to thank Khalifa University for giving me the opportunity to talk to you today. And before I dive into what I'm going to talk about, I just wanted to explain a little bit about who I am and where I work. Today's presentation will be about creating a culture of innovation, and that will be applicable both to small startup businesses of one or two people all the way through to huge, large organizations as well. But first, I work in EPTIS, which is an ICT Research and Innovation Centre that's been established by Etisalat, BT and Khalifa University and is supported by the ICT Fund. We're located at the Khalifa University campus in Abu Dhabi, and we're made up of management and research staff from BT Etisalat and the university itself. We provide advanced applications and services through the use of artificial intelligence and intelligent ICT systems to try and put in place the support infrastructure to facilitate, develop and enable the digital networked economy in the UAE and beyond. But a little bit about myself quickly. My name's Nathan Eden. I'm actually the head of innovation at EPTIC. But before I go on, I'll have a little bit of an introduction of myself. My name's Nathan Eden. I'm the head of innovation at EPTIC. Before I joined EPTIC, I worked for BT for about just over 20 years, all within various innovation roles, initially supporting BT's internal innovation strategy, and then later on working and consulting with many of BT's top corporate clients, of which you can see some of the logos below, to help try and create their innovation strategies with them, manage innovation activities, things like technology scouting, horizon scanning, ideation, visualization, technical and economic testing, the whole plethora of innovation activities. But now I'm going to go into the main part of the presentation, and which is about creating that culture of innovation. But before I do, I just wanted to talk about what innovation is, because innovation really is dependent on who you ask. A quick search on the internet gives you probably 10 or 15 different versions of this, but the one that seemed to stand out more was that innovation is a process that an organization goes through to conceptualize new processes, products and services, or to approach those existing processes and products in slightly new ways. Personally, I would say I could make it a little bit simpler and say it's about applying a repeatable process to a specific challenge to make a new idea become useful and to add value. But I think in my experience as well, I think innovation is something that needs to be defined within each organization, depending on how big you are as an organization, what your strategy is and what your maturity of that organization is in terms of innovation. Now, there's a few ways you can kind of break innovation down, and I'll scan over a couple. There's incremental and disruptive innovation. Incremental innovation, a bit like the Coca-Cola example there, you're still working in your current market. In the Coca-Cola example, they've got their original flavor, but they've incrementally innovated different versions of that, whether it's been reduced sugar or different flavors of that Coca-Cola beverage. Disruptive innovation is probably best shown with an example using Blockbusters. Now, for you that don't know, Blockbusters was a video rental chain of shops. And the use case, the customer experience was you had to go into the shop, you'd look at the videos that were on available, and you'd rent them, take them home. Now, they did a few sort of incremental innovations over time, adding computer games as part of their rental catalog, as well as selling things like popcorn and soft drinks. But whilst things looked great for them, as the broadband speeds, the network speeds around the world increased, and the ability to stream content became more and more available, then a completely disruptive entity came to market in Netflix and almost totally destroyed the Blockbusters business, basically, because the user experience is so much better with Netflix. So there's a couple of examples of maybe incremental versus disruptive innovation. And there's also the open and closed innovation. Open innovation tends to be quite collaborative in nature. You're talking with partners and suppliers, both big and small, that can help you innovate a new product or service. Closed innovation tends to be very internal. It's probably something where you're generating your own IP or some trade secrets, and you don't really want other organizations to hear about those. It's worth noting that fairly obviously that the UAE's national innovation strategy is based very much on an open innovation format. We're trying to establish ecosystems with individuals, institutions across many different sectors. So that's what innovation is. What innovation isn't, I think sometimes is often quite difficult to define. Innovation isn't just about a good idea. An idea is completely worthless unless it's done in a way that provides new value for someone, for a customer, or that customer sees your innovation as better than it was before. Other than that, it's just an idea. Innovation tends not to be about invention. Invention usually comes from the research phases of a product, but innovation is more about doing something different with that innovation. It may be, with that invention. It may be that an invention was created for a particular use case or a particular market, and the innovation function maybe uses that technology in a slightly different way to achieve different goals. Innovation isn't just about financial investment, though that's important. For me, innovation is about investing in enabling people within your entity to improve the world around them. And kind of jokingly say innovation isn't about casually dressed professionals working in co-working spaces, though they can help. Innovation is about creating a culture across all the functions of your organization that helps you strategically build and develop the future of your organization. So that's what innovation is and what it isn't in a very high level. What are the certain expectations you can get from investing in innovation as you go on this journey of creating this culture? Well, simplistically, the rule of thumb which Google first popularized was the 70-20-10 rule. And this was developed really to try and help guide the investment both in money and time, and actually people as well, into your certain innovation initiatives. You can see from the diagram that it's kind of divided into 3 time horizons, 0 to 1 years, 1 to 3 years, and 3 years plus. Your core activity, so the core things that your business does, usually comes in that first horizon, and will normally take about 70% of investment of time, people, and money. And in terms of your long-term revenue returns, it's likely to make up about 10% of those. Very important part of innovation is protecting the core of the business, because without the core, you're going to be left with nothing. The second time horizon kind of looks at adjacent markets, so it's things slightly different from the core. So it might be that you develop your product to work for different sectors, for instance, or slightly different use cases. But it's an adjacent activity, and you're looking to kind of a time horizon of between 1 and 3 years for that. Again, the rule of thumb is about 20% of your investment. And it will likely make about 20% of your returns within that 1 to 3 year period. The final horizon there is transformational. Now, this is really the big one, I guess. You're looking at a time horizon of about 3 years plus, but this is moving your business to something completely different from the core that you've been working on. And I'll give some examples about companies like Amazon and how they've done that and moved through this later on in this presentation. Transformational innovation does take a little bit of time to get going through a business, and usually only takes about sort of 10% of your investment, but in the long term is likely to be the vast majority of your return on of your investment as well, coming back from that. Now, there's different ways that a company can address moving through these horizons, whether they have an individual innovation function that's in charge of this, or whether they have innovation spread across the whole business, embedded in each team, in each function. In my experience, innovation works best when there is a standalone innovation function, but also I'm not necessarily sure they're brilliantly effective in driving innovation in the core. You often need the subject matter experts to be driving innovation in the core. So it's really up to the innovation function to try and support those subject experts. Innovation functions and individual standalone innovation functions probably best focusing on the adjacent and transformational activities. And as I said at the very beginning, this doesn't just apply to big organizations. This can apply to small organizations as well. If you're a startup, you still need to be looking at potential transformational innovations. It just might mean that you don't have a team focused on it for 1 or 3 years because you can't necessarily afford that. But it's something that should still be considered. So, what are the common mistakes when creating a culture of innovation within your entity? I think the biggest one is just how much people underestimate the time and financial investment required to create that culture. It's a huge investment in time. It takes many years to get going, and years of constant and continuous effort as well. One of the key things about creating a successful culture of innovation is having constant executive level support, driving that thought process of innovation. And without it, then you really are more likely to be failing in that respect. Businesses that don't value innovation skills as a core competency often fail as well. They're sometimes seen as a soft skill and not necessarily as a necessary skill. So seeing them as more than just a nice to have and actually a core competency is very important. And equally, in terms of creating that culture, takes time and money. Actually doing individual innovative solutions, whether you're developing processes around your innovation strategy or actually building innovation projects, they take time and money and the right skill sets to try and push through those things. The key thing, as I said in previous slides, about a successful innovation is that it's how it's perceived by the end user or the customer. So it's really important to listen to those people when you're building your innovation strategies, when you're thinking about what may be your adjacent or transformational markets that you're looking at in the future, because it's really important that there's a perceived benefit from the end user or customer in your new innovation. If they don't see that, then your innovation's failed, basically. Often the thought is that if a leader within an executive or a leader within an organization says, okay, I want all of your good ideas, that tends to be not a great way of developing an innovation culture or generating good ideas either. It puts an over-reliance on employees to come up with really good ideas. I think in my experience, the best way to start is to ask your people in the business what stops them finding and testing and trying out and commercializing new ideas. What are the reasons? Is it that there's a fear of failure? Is it that they don't have the time in their day jobs to address that? Address these sorts of issues. So by understanding those barriers, you can help try and fix them and start moving towards creating that culture. And there's often too much pressure put in those transformational innovations as well. Often the easiest and biggest and usually quickest benefits come from what I say about innovating in the factory. So actually just changing and using technologies, emerging technologies to change your current processes or your business models that might help improve your operational efficiencies. and they can be usually the quick wins when it comes to starting an innovation culture. Organisations across the globe tend to have this institutional fear of failure. We all do as people as well. So it's really important to try and change the way that we think of failure within a business. It's not failure, it's learning. If you haven't done something, and if something didn't work, then you learn, you work out why it didn't. And then you move forward and you put that into the next iteration of your work. You shouldn't punish failure either. It's difficult, so encourage trying difficult things rather than punishing failure and missed opportunities. And often I've seen companies around the globe, the ones that I would say have probably got the strongest innovation cultures, and they'll be the names and brands that you know of. They will actually reward the best, most epic failures of the month. You know, for some reason or other, that innovation hasn't worked. And they would reward the employees or the project teams for at least giving it a go. But the most important, I think, out of all of this is, whilst most innovations will fail, because that's just generally the way of the world when you're trying new difficult things, it's important that you fail fast. It's important to identify that this is going to fail or this is not the right thing that you're doing, and to stop that work, stop the time investments and the money investments. So failing fast is a really important thing to keep looking for. Now, I wanted to talk about, give an example about some of the things I've just talked about in a real world example. And by that, I'm using Amazon here. So hopefully you can see on the screen here, a couple of decades ago, this would have been Amazon's homepage. They sold books, and only books, and they had about 1 million of them, and people started to buy books, mainly academic books at the time, because it was nice and easy to search. You didn't have to go out to a shop to find them and find that the title that you're after actually wasn't in the shop. So Amazon did great there. And then they started to look at, within their core, and as they built this technology that could help them literally stick a book on a digital shelf somewhere, then they started to expand into other things like selling games and videos. It wasn't really much different in terms of the technology needed. And then something started to happen as they started to build on the architecture and the technology that was underlying and enabling the whole of their business. They realized that, well, we can sell a lot more than just books and videos and computer games. We can start selling beauty products and TVs and bikes and home furniture, because we've just created this huge enabling technology to help us sell these sorts of things. So those for me are examples of kind of the core business innovating through time. But actually what happened was by building that technology to enable millions and millions and millions of different products to be put on there, and again, millions of customers to be able to go onto the site and see reviews and watch videos of the products and stuff like that. What they actually did was build a really powerful web solution. And it took a little bit of time for Amazon to realize that that was a solution that was marketable in its own right, and that there's many organizations around the world that would benefit from that. And this is what we know as today as Amazon Web Services, and by far the most successful thing that Amazon do at the moment, and the lion's share of their revenue comes in through Amazon Web Services. So that's a really great example of a transformational innovation. So they've moved away from selling books to actually selling web space and web services, which is something completely different. And of course, then that in itself becomes an enabler for Amazon themselves. Again, transformational. They're starting to sell digital hardware, whether it's books or Amazon Echoes or Kindles, those sorts of things, and actually they're a digital content provider through Prime Video. All of those things were enabled by AWS, which was enabled by the innovation roadmap they went through to add more and more products onto their portfolio. So you can see, I think Amazon's obviously a very good example, and obviously a very successful example as well. So what comes out of innovation? And this is important when you're thinking about your culture as well. For me, if you've if you've got a team, an innovation team, really they're trying to help answer the questions the business doesn't know about a particular innovation, and to try and provide that unbiased view back to the business for them to make that decision. And it could be you're a startup and you're an individual entrepreneur, and that's your job to do that as well, and to try and unbiasedly answer the questions that the business doesn't know the answer to yet. And you do that by lots of things, by producing proof of concepts of the technology, developing prototypes, which you might put in a customer's hand if it's a physical prototype, for example, and talk to a customer about what they think about it, and then change that prototype a little bit, and then build 100 prototypes that you put into small-scale alpha trials with those customers. And you're learning all the time about your product and what customers want and where you're going right and where you're going wrong. And of course, that's driven by market insight that an innovation person would be always be listening to, and then help develop early business cases and things like that to try and not only test the wheels from a technical point of view, that this technically is going to happen and work, but that from a business point of view, it's going to do what we think as well. It's going to make or save money. Not only that, obviously, doing all that sort of stuff, you develop a new human capability in your organization. People develop those soft skills that are related to innovation. You can help develop new organizational structures and processes. You develop that improved culture of support and ambition and drive to move the business forward year on year. And also there's ways of how you can measure these things as well. So your KPIs about moving your business forward, which are 100% related to innovation and keeping the business relevant and future-proofed. You can measure your success on whether you're making or saving money based on the innovation activities going on, whether you're increasing your customer and user base, and how many new products are launched. But remembering it's not always about quantity, it's often about quality. Better to have one really good product than 5 not so good ones that slowly disappear from the marketplace over years. And of course, you can also measure the return on investment from your innovation activities in terms of the new product, services, and cost savings associated. What is really important is to measure the savings associated with not doing something. So as I said, most innovations don't work, being able to stop something early and fail fast, as I said, is really important. And being able to inform the business that this isn't the right time, perhaps in the market, or the technology isn't right, or our underlying architecture isn't right to support that technology, our customers aren't wanting this, we've been beaten by competitors. Doing all of that to stop something happening in flight can save so much money and so much time for a business, for them to focus on other activities that are more likely to be successful. So it's really important, I think, to measure the cost savings from actually stopping something happening as well, because sometimes it's not difficult it's not hard for those figures to run into many millions of dirhams, if not billions of dirhams, if you're a large organization. Now we're in obviously strange times with the global pandemic, and I'm often asked about investing in innovation, and a lot of companies don't have revenue coming in, certainly from certain sectors like the aviation industry, retail, those sorts of sectors. They haven't got the money. They're protecting their core assets as much as they can, so they haven't necessarily got the free money to invest in innovation, the free time to invest in innovation. And I'm asked if that's the right strategy. And I think for me, it probably isn't. Time and history has taught us that during any global downturn that humanity has had, we need to adapt. There's a saying that necessity is the mother of invention. As an example that's quite pertinent to our times at the moment, the very first vaccine was invented to treat smallpox back in the 18th century, which at the time was the single biggest killer of people in Europe. And the word vaccine itself comes from the actual virus, the Latin word for the virus. So that shows you that, when there are issues, obviously invention and adaptation is required. And innovation is about your ability as a business, as a person, to adapt your services and solutions to that new business. to that new world, should I say. And if you don't adapt, then you're likely to be left behind, or maybe your business won't be there in the future. Some examples of what's happened, which I think proves that during economic downturns such as we're experiencing now, that they are fertile grounds for innovation. Airbnb, obviously most people know about them. They're a cheaper alternative to hotels. Dropbox, they started giving away more storage space for free because they were on a market strategy to build up their user base rather than getting revenue in. Uber, they were a cheaper alternative to taxis, a better customer experience to traditional taxis. And not only that, but it enabled drivers to start their own businesses, people to start their own businesses as drivers. That might have been a second job in some cases when needed. And Cloudera, they benefit from, they provide a very cost-effective solution that enables large businesses to save money. And at times during these economic downturns, everything there is about saving money or improving operations or giving people the opportunity to make a bit of extra money. The link here between the examples I've chosen is that these were all businesses created during the economic crash across the globe in 2008, 2009, but all within 3 or 4 years became $1 billion unicorns. The timing was right for those companies to come to market, and they're just examples of companies that have come to market in a time of a global downturn. It's up to you as an organisation, as a startup or a large enterprise, to adapt your products and services, your offerings, based on what's happening in the globe today. Why is it that we often find that these things can happen? Well, research suggests that when talking to founders of successful businesses, 42% of those founders cite timing to market as the key reason for success. And interestingly, only 14% of them cite funding as the key reason for success. Timing is by far and away the most important attribute to a business or an idea being successful or not. And actually, during a global downturn like we're having, the opportunities are often more than they would be during normal times. There tends to be a higher appetite for risk within businesses, to buy things that can help save them money, or to attempt things that might help them make a little bit more money, or to pivot completely and change their whole business process because of it. The attitude of, well, what have we got to lose? It's bad. Let's just keep going. And obviously, because revenues are tight, there's obviously an attraction for businesses and individuals to find ways to save money and to make some more money as well. So looking and scanning the horizons for technologies and potential partners is always really important to do. So finally, developing that innovation culture, to me, is about balancing paradoxes, and there are always paradoxes when it comes to innovation. I said before, having constant executive level support is probably the most important thing to developing a culture of innovation, and I believe that to be true. And whilst you have that constant championing of innovation, it's also correct to try and balance the paradoxes of those cultures as well. So an executive, a business may have identified the need that their business needs to become more adaptable, but you've still got to protect that core business. If you think back to the horizons that we talked about earlier, you have to protect that core business, because without it, you're probably likely to fail as well. So identifying the need to adapt, but staying strong to what you're good at as well. You've got to try and fix those internal barriers to innovation, as I mentioned, to try and facilitate and inspire people to create new ideas and keep your business future-proofed. But you still have to maintain individual accountability for those ideas. You can't just have people coming up with thousands of ideas and wasting time and money trying to investigating those. There still has to be some individual accountability, whilst giving people the flexibility to work on those thoughts. It's important to have a simple and well publicized innovation process, so people know exactly what's available to them and what they can get from the either an innovation function or the different opportunities. But also they need to know how they're going to be measured, whether you have a gating process as part of your innovation function and what needs to be achieved for a product or a new service, new process, new idea to get through each of those gates. They need to know what they're going to be measured against as well. I mentioned about the fear of failure. There obviously needs to be a tolerance for failure, but not a tolerance for incompetence. So that's a very difficult paradox often to manage. And I keep stressing this because it really is important. Finding and measuring the success of stopping an activity. Innovation is often about creating new things, but it's as important for an innovation function that's doing a lot of that market analysis, gaining market insights, looking at what competitors are doing and what users and customers are wanting. It's important to know when the time is right to stop an activity and save wasted time, effort, and money. Only then, I think, once you've kind of fixed all of those paradoxes, can innovation then be considered and rewarded as a key attribute within the business, protecting your business in the future. So thank you very much for listening to my presentation today. I hope you found it useful. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat available, and they will come through to both people at Khalifa University and myself, and we'll endeavour to get back to you as quickly as we can. Thank you very much.